Good morning. This is Brooke Rouse from the Small Business Development Center. Put on my screen. Good morning and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have Dan Rickman here with us from the Small Business Administration. He's going to provide us with some updates on the PPP and the EIDL, and so that for those who have applied and received those funds, it's important to know what's next for that. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today, and I will give you access to the screen to share your screen and take us through those updates.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Okay, so thank you so much, Brooke. Appreciate having an opportunity to chat with you guys up in St. Lawrence County this morning. And chat a little bit about some of the updates, like Brooke mentioned, the PPP program, and also discuss the EIDL program. I know our office is still getting a lot of questions about both, and Brooke and I chatted beforehand and decided, rather than try and PowerPoint everybody to death this morning, since we've been doing plenty of that. I think the idea is I'm just going to share some of the highlights of some of the changes to the PPP program, some of the procedural things that we've done, give everybody a general update, and touch on the EIDL, and then really open up to questions, because I know you probably have some specific questions. I will say I may not be able to answer all of them, but I'll do my best. And let's go ahead and get started. So I think what prompted this presentation is that SBA released with the Treasury Department almost a couple of weeks ago now, an update to the forgiveness procedures for the Paycheck Protection Program. I think folks are probably generally aware that this program was launched very, very quickly in less than 2 weeks, back at the end of March, beginning of April. And, it's been evolving ever since. As the program has been developed, and we've learned more about it, and Congress has continued to make some changes. So one of the big changes was the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act back in June, which did a couple of things. It relaxed some of the requirements for how much of the PPP proceeds had to be spent on payroll, down from 75% to 60%. And the PPP Flexibility Act also added some additional safe harbors for, in particular, the requirement for maintaining your average full-time equivalent employees during your covered period for the Paycheck Protection Program. The cover period started off as 8 weeks when the program launched, and the PPP Flexibility Act actually extended that to 24 weeks that you have to utilize the funds consistent with the requirements for the program, such as using 60% of the funds for payroll. And then most recently, SBA and Treasury released Simplified Forgiveness procedures, where for loans under $50,000, the FTE requirement, as well as the requirement to maintain wages or not reduce them more than 25%, which was originally with the program, was waived for loans under $50,000, and we published a new forgiveness form. So hopefully you guys can see my screen right here, and I thought it could be a good idea to show folks where to find answers to, official answers, I should say, to most of the questions you might have about the program. So this is our coronavirus relief options page on our website. If you go to sba.gov, you can navigate your way here. You can also just type in www.sba.gov/PPP, and that will take you to this screen as well. That's what I do because it's easier. And you'll see here that there's a table of contents where it's got some general notifications, but you can jump to loan details and forgiveness, some of the guidance, and a lot of the official language about the program. So I'm not going to click on everything because I think folks know how to navigate a website just fine. But I do want to point you to some of the supplemental materials, like the frequently asked questions for lenders and borrowers. That's answers a lot of some of the nuanced questions we get. There's also under the loan details and forgiveness section, a frequently asked questions specifically for PPP forgiveness, and a little bit more detail in here. And in this section, you can also find the forgiveness applications. Okay. Currently, we have 3 different forms for the application. We have what's, I guess we could call the long form that was published in mid-June. And that's really for businesses that, for whatever reason, can't make some of the assertions to use either the easy form or the new 3508S simple forgiveness application form for 50,000 or less. I think what we're finding is that the vast majority of businesses can certainly use the easy loan forgiveness application. I will show that to you guys actually. Just so you can see exactly what we're talking about here. The assertions is in this section is kind of what you need to key in on for determining if you can use the easy forgiveness form or not. The easy forgiveness form does not have, I should say, some of the additional worksheets for calculating FTE, in part because part of the easy form is that one of 2 things. You either can assert that you are eligible for the FTE safe harbor that is based on if you were unable to reach your pre-disaster FTE requirements due to government, whether direct federal government requirements or indirect from local government, shutdowns due to social distancing or limitations in your space or any similar reasons, you're eligible for that safe harbor for the full-time equivalent. So again, you don't have to necessarily maintain those FTEs the entire time that you're using the payroll funds. I think our sense is, particularly, certainly in upstate New York, vast majority of businesses can make that assertion safely. I would say that generally, if you want to get some counsel on that to, help prepare the documentation, because you do have to be able to document that, hey, here was a government mandate that required that only 50% occupancy for my business for some period of time that affected your ability to rehire, right? You can do that. I would say, I know our friends at the Small Business Development Center are on the call. They're probably living and breathing this stuff just as much as our offices, if not more. And they can help you, kind of prepare the documentation or even prepare, go through this forgiveness form. There is a companion instructions document for each of the forms that goes into a lot more detail on the nuances of the form, and kind of explains it in quite a bit more detail. How do we figure out the covered period, right, or an alternative covered period, questions like that, and it kind of defines a lot of these things. Okay, how to calculate the payroll costs, what are the eligible non-payroll costs, everything you really need to prepare the application. This is as compared to the 3508S simple form, where it's shorter. You know, a lot of it, I guess you don't really have to show as much of the math, if you will, to take you back to math class. Um, but I will point out that fundamentally, you know, the calculations are still very much the same. So when you have to calculate your forgiveness amount, right, that you're eligible for, if you read through the application, it gives you some information about how to do that. There's the companion instructions document. I would honestly recommend, you know, as probably a very helpful exercise, you can use the easy forgiveness calculations that will come not to the same amount, but you don't have to submit that form, okay? And again, the biggest thing is that you don't have to assert a safe harbor for FTEs if you're eligible for the simple form because your loan is 50,000 or less. For all 50,000 or less loans, it is the requirement is being waived for the FTE calculation. Again, it's waived. And again, same for the employee wage reduction calculation. So that's by far the biggest difference. And I believe somewhere around 70% of all PPP loans are under $50,000 out of the 500 odd billion loans that were approved. So I think our hope is this will make it a lot easier for folks. Okay, I'll move on quite quickly through the rest of this stuff. If you are interested, the official federal regulations, the interim final rules that have been published in the Federal Register, you can see that there's a whole slew of them here, okay? In addition, you can see the guidance that we're providing to lenders on how to process and approve and submit forgiveness applications. This information in complete depth is located further down here, okay, under lender forms and guidance. I will point out that the forgiveness application portal for the lenders has been open since August 8th. So the lenders do have the capability to accept and approve loan forgiveness applications and submit them to SBA right now, okay? So you can submit your forgiveness application, whichever one you're eligible for or you choose to use, to your lender today with all the relevant guidance, okay? They have all the relevant guidance they need. I know some lenders may be still working on their own websites and things of that nature, but ultimately the system is available for them to use right now, okay? And we're working with a lot of them on helping them to process those right now and training them up. Scrolling all the way down, if you're interested, you can see the loan data state by state as well as overall. You can see we've approved, or over 5 million loans have been approved for $525 billion, which is very, very significant. And that is kind of the highlights for the PPP side of things. I do want to touch on EIDL before we open up for questions a little bit. You can see here, this is the coronavirus relief options page. So there's information about the economic injury disaster loans. While PPP has been closed since August 8th, EIDL loans, if you have not already applied for and received one, are still available, okay? There's still funding available. SBA is still accepting and processing and approving applications right now, and you can apply right here. There's an FAQ document about the EIDL loans that was recently published. Some folks may not have seen this one yet. I believe we published it a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago. And I'll just go ahead and show that to you. It's pretty comprehensive and goes into some of the basic information. What's the difference between PPP and EIDL? Terms, 3.75% for businesses, 2.75 for not-for-profits, 30-year term. Collateral is required for loans over 25,000 and personal guarantees for loans over 200,000. It is not a forgivable loan. I know that there's been a lot of confusion between these two programs, but currently the EIDL is not forgivable. And EIDL is not a new program, okay? The EIDL program has been around for decades, and it's for disaster recovery. What was interesting is this is the first time it's ever been used for a pandemic versus a natural disaster, which is typically what this program was designed for. Talks a little bit about when your first payment is due, how to pay, okay? You know, I think folks, you know, just because payments are deferred doesn't mean you can't start making payments now if you want to. Interest does accrue throughout the entire deferral period. And by default, if you just submit a payment to SBA, your payment's going to go to pay down the interest first. You can direct payments towards principal if you contact SBA first, though. So, you know, again, lots of additional detail here, a little bit about, you know, what happens, you know, who's eligible, the process if you're declined for an EIDL loan initially. You know, you can always request for reconsideration within the 6 months. Gives you the website or the email address, I should say. I'll point out that if a loan is declined, there is a lot more underwriting involved for declined loans. So when EIDL was conceived, the CARES Act version of EIDL, I should say, SBA created a new portal and a streamlined process as a function of the CARES Act. So, but when a loan is declined, additional documentation will be required, okay? So there's something to keep in mind. So I think this is probably a good pause because I really want to give folks time to answer some or ask some questions, and hopefully I can give some advice on some of these. And Brooke, you want to take over for the Q&A session? Or is there anything you feel I should cover before we open up for questions?
Well,
Did I miss anything?
I always have questions to ask if no one else does, just for clarification or reiteration. But certainly for those on the call, please type in your questions. If you prefer to have them more anonymous, you can choose on the chat just to send them directly to me or to Dan, and we can read them out more anonymously, which I do anyways. But please, this is your chance to have Dan right here to ask questions. So don't hesitate. We wanted to make sure to leave a majority of the time for that so that we're addressing exactly what your questions are. So we do have one. Says, my lender says currently the portal is open for loans over 150,000. Once I receive word about the portal opening for loans under that amount, I will reach out to you to discuss about submitting. And they received this information on the 19th of October. So Dan, you had mentioned that the banks are kind of catching up with all of this. What's the process typically with the banks? And it may vary, obviously.
Yeah, so it's certainly this lender is probably referring to their own portal of some sort. Our portal is open. They can submit loans for any amount of any type and have been able to do so since August 8th. Okay, so it is possible that your lender is adding their own requirements. You know, I really can't speculate on what their reasons are at this time, but all I can say is they can. Okay, you know, and I will also say that if you submit a forgiveness application to your lender the lender has 60 days to process that application. So that is part of the regulations, and is a function of your lender um, participating in the PPP program. The regulations, our regulations, are what set the deadlines. Okay. I hope that makes sense, but um, that's when the 60-day clock starts, is when you submit an application. Um, you know, I'm not suggesting that, you contact your lender. So SBA says you have to accept my application. I'm not saying that. I am saying though that, that there are, there's rules for the program, and there is a 60-day window. So the application is available on our website. If your lender is choosing to have, an electronic version of that, that's fine. But any delays they have on their end in setting that up should not affect you if you're able to apply for forgiveness right now. I guess that's kind of the intent behind setting that 60-day turnaround requirement for the lender.
And you showed on one of the slides the volume that the lenders have experienced. It's pretty extraordinary. A little over 5,000 lenders taking care of these. Was that billions or millions? I looked
That's
quickly.
billions. That's half a trillion, if you want to call
Yeah,
it.
pretty incredible. So I think for those lenders who are processing a lot of these, perhaps they're creating their portals to be able to process these in a somewhat efficient way. So that would make sense. But so in some cases, a lender might have their own system and application. They wouldn't necessarily require that SBA form, but do you think it's worthwhile to fill out that form and send it along to the lender, or to just wait to
You
see
know,
how?
That's a great question, because I mean, ultimately, if you're eligible for 100% forgiveness right now, and you have all the documentation you need, and you can provide that to your lender, there's no reason to wait. I mean, really, I mean, there's no additional advantage to it at this point. Um, the Otherwise, you've got a loan sitting there in your books, right? It's still a loan. Like right now, everybody that has PPP funds and that haven't been forgiven, it is a liability that's sitting on your balance sheet. So I guess purely from like an accounting perspective, you might want to get that off your balance sheet, right? Um, so there's a lot of good reasons to submit the application now. I'll point out to the folks that you're probably on the 24-week covered period right now if you needed it. You don't have to wait 24 weeks, right? If you've spent all the funds, it's somewhere in one of the 40 FAQs I just showed you guys. You can apply for forgiveness at any point once you've used the funds. So again, not a whole lot of reasons to wait. I see a question here about, are the loans under 50,000 automatically going to be forgiven? No, there is no automatic forgiveness. What we've done is simplify the process for loans under 50,000. Automatic forgiveness is not going to be something that the Small Business Administration and the Treasury Department can just do administratively via regulation. To do a, I don't know, blanket forgiveness or something like that, it would require congressional action. It would require a new law be passed, okay, to be frank. And, we certainly cannot speculate on when or if that might happen, because we're bound by law as it exists right now. Okay. So it's there's really no way to predict when or if that would happen. So my general advice is, if you're eligible now, go for it, right? Get it off your balance sheet.
And other than getting it off your balance sheet, is there a rush to take care of it now? Is it, I'm trying to remember the timeline for when when the payment begins, and when it begins accruing
That's
interest and all of that.
That's a great question. So, so technically, the loan is accruing interest from the moment you receive the funds. Okay. When you apply for forgiveness, um, the amount of the loan that for which you are forgiven, the corresponding interest is also forgiven. Okay. So say you have some scenario where some percentage of the loan is not forgiven, the interest that accrued for that small section, that gets tacked onto it, and then it amortizes over the remainder of the 2 or 5-year payment period, depending on when you got the loan. There is a deferment in place, though, and for payments and interest, and that was 10 months from the end of your covered period. That was extended from the original PPP legislation by the Flexibility Act. So realistically, no business is going to have be expected to make payments on a PPP loan until sometime, I don't know, late next summer at the earliest, based on when you may have applied for the loan. Okay. So from a principal and interest perspective, there's not really a sense of urgency. I did have a good question that somebody brought up to me, a week or two ago, and they did point out that there is kind of a one good reason to have the forgiveness approved sooner rather than later is for tax reporting purposes. As the PPP forgiveness, the PPP funds that are forgiven, okay, normally that would be considered income, right? Anytime if you had a loan that was forgiven or something like that would be considered income. But the CARES Act had language that required that PPP forgiveness amount be non-taxable. So it's still income, okay, but it's non-taxable income. So that's good, right? However, the IRS did issue regulations, because there are many, or guidance, I should say, that says any expenses that the non-taxable income are used to pay are not deductible. Okay. So while, you're not going, this isn't going to be treated as income for tax reporting purposes, and the equivalent amount that is forgiven that is used for payroll or other eligible expenses, those expenses are not deductible. Okay. So what does all this mean? Well, I'm sure the IRS is going to issue like guidance when tax season comes around about some of these scenarios. But best case scenario is prior to you filing your taxes, you've applied for and been approved for forgiveness, and then you can do all the math one time. I don't think anybody wants to, wait until after they file their taxes and now they have to do an amendment to their tax return because, the forgiveness amount, you now have income that you didn't prior to filing your taxes, and now all those expense. You see where I'm going? Like it'd be a lot easier if your forgiveness is already done. So.
Right. And as you say that, if you're talking about a 60-day window, here we are almost to November,
Yeah.
which means this week you should
Yeah.
probably,
Well,
if you want to keep it within your 2020 tax, clear it from your 2020 taxes.
Yeah. Now, of course, your
Might
taxes
want
aren't
to.
due till April 15th, though. So,
True.
you
Yeah.
got a little bit of a wiggle room. But some businesses, they do want to get, their taxes done early, right? You don't want to wait till April 15th, right? So, I just point that out that, it's you can't get more forgiveness than you're already eligible for, right? So, like, if you're eligible for 100% forgiveness now, what are we waiting for?
Right. And if your bank's not set up, your lender's not set up, if you send along the backup information and the forms from the SBA site, at least they've got a file started for you, hopefully, and that will maybe smooth things along, or you may have to do it
Yeah.
all over again. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at least you'd be organized with your documentation and all of that.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So even if your lender's not accepting it yet, for whatever reason, doesn't mean you shouldn't have it ready, right? So that as soon as they open it up, you can take care of it. So, good point.
Great. There's a question about how long does it take to receive forgiveness, excluding that 60-day window. And again, this is forgiveness. It was a loan that was in theory used, and you either are going to have to repay it or not. That's where the forgiveness comes in. But what's the timeline? Do you know at this point? Are they already being forgiven now that the portal's open?
Yeah. So loans are being forgiven. I think the regulation 60 days for the lender, and then I believe I'd have to look it up. There's a lot of interim final rules. It's 30 days for SBA to render a decision. So once the lender submits the application to the portal. So
So it could be up to 90 days.
yeah, if if they stretch it all the way out, at every step of the process, I don't expect that will be the case, once lenders do start ramping up, because it's fairly well automated on SBA's end. So so tough to predict, your mileage is going to vary.
Sure. And there was a question too, and this bridges with the EIDL. This individual received an EIDL advance, so that's the grant, based on the number of employees, and then received the PPP loan. How do they interact, and will that grant amount from the EIDL advance be deducted from the PPP? Is that how it works, or can you just clearly explain that kind of interaction between the two?
Sure. So short answer is yes, it is deducted from the loan forgiveness amount. And the reason for that is that the CARES Act specifically said um, these funds must be deducted from the forgiveness amount. So this isn't something that SBA made up. It was part of the CARES Act. So it's a requirement of the legislation. And it happens, part of it you may have seen as I was quickly scrolling through that there was an EIDL advance box, right? Whatever you put into the application for the EIDL, when the lender submits the forgiveness application to SBA, SBA will deduct it based on our records, right? If we know we gave you the advance, we know you have an advance, right? It'll automatically be deducted from the loan forgiveness amount. So, from a planning perspective, if you do not want to have an PPP loan after you receive forgiveness and you got an advance, you might want to reserve some of the PPP funds to pay down the remaining balance that is equivalent to the advance. Okay. I know that's easier said than done if you've already exhausted all of the PPP funds. But if you haven't, just keep in mind that amount is going to ultimately remain on the balance sheet, because when SBA pays down the loan to the bank, there's going to be that amount left, right? And then the bank will just amortize whatever that advance amount is over the remainder of the term. That's exactly how it'll work. And again, the terms are, if you got a loan prior to the PPP Flexibility Act in June 16th, I think, it was 2 years. You have a 2-year term on that PPP loan. If you got a PPP loan after that, it was 5 years. If you have a 2-year PPP loan, you can request that your lender change the term to the 5-year term. They don't have to approve it, okay? But you can request of your lender that they convert that 2-year PPP loan to a 5-year. None of that really matters until, you've gotten the whole forgiveness situation determined, because, you're not making payments right now, right? And, all whatever interest is accruing, that's not going to be changed by the term, right? So there's no reason to, call your bank up and say, I need to make this a 5-year term yet. You can wait until after the forgiveness stuff is done.
Okay. And just for simple math with this, if you say you received a $1,000 advance, you're a small business, one employee, $1,000 advance, and then you received a $5,000 PPP. When you go for forgiveness, they'll deduct the 1,000, they'll forgive 4,000, and then you'll still be liable to pay off that 1,000 over the 2 or 5-year terms.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So hopefully you still have $1,000 left over. That would be the hope, but I know that may not be practical for everyone.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned that the EIDL advance is no longer available, but the EIDL loan is still available. Those terms are quite generous if anyone's still interested in that. And at this point, the EIDL loan and the PPP don't interact. It was really just the EIDL advance, right? So I've had some people say, well, I got the PPP, I'm not going to apply to the EIDL, or vice versa throughout the process. But if there it was really just the advance that had implications. Is that correct?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
one other there's always a qualifier. There's always a it depends. The one other variable, okay, intersection between PPP and EIDL is the use of proceeds, okay? Um, you know, for the EIDL program, you cannot duplicate the purpose of the loan. So PPP is limited to payroll, and certain other non-eligible non-payroll expenses such as rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. Economic injury disaster loan can be used for any, essentially, um, almost any operating expense. Okay, so like literally any of your overhead, right, can be used for the EIDL program. So there's a lot more, it's a bigger strike box, right? Much larger array of things you can spend the funds on. The suggestion has been that if you have PPP funds that you're using mostly for payroll, is that you make it clear in your documentation that you're not using the same funds for the same purpose at the same time. So, you have 8 weeks of PPP. Don't use EIDL to supplement your payroll while you're using PPP, right? That's how you avoid any potential duplication of purposes. Once you've exhausted all the PPP funds, well, then there's nothing to worry about. Like you can't duplicate the purposes at that point because you don't have PPP funds anymore, right? And then you can, at that point, use the EIDL for payroll or anything, okay? So that is the one thing to kind of keep in mind for the few businesses that may still have access to both sets of funds concurrently, okay? If it's not concurrent, if you got a PPP, you spent it, you want to apply for EIDL now, then there's no overlap in time, right? So nothing to worry about.
Great. Thank you. If anyone has questions, please type in. I'll just keep going because hopefully my questions are helpful. But please type into the chat box. It should be at the bottom of your screen if you can't find it. And feel free to ask. I always say no questions too silly or small. So now's your chance. You showed us where you mentioned that people can begin to pay for their EIDL, even though it's a 1-year deferment. The form and the location for that, at that point, do you need to provide backup documentation? Is there an advantage to beginning those payments? Do you have any kind of tips or recommendations there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's purely up to your decision. If the reason we're getting a lot of these questions is that for some businesses, their finances have been improving, right? They've got some cash flow, and they want to keep that in, knock down some of that interest, right? So it's your decision. You simply have to have your loan number, right? And you can set up those payments either online or mail them, as you can see here. And it really is up to you. Okay, you don't have to. right? You can't even go so far as to, some businesses took out more funds than they needed, right? Um, and if you got a $20,000 loan, you spent 5, and you don't think you need the other 15 anymore, you can make a big, payment to SBA to principal to reduce the loan balance. Okay, that's certainly something that you can do, and you can then request that SBA re-amortize that loan if you want a smaller payment. So there's, this is, for folks that have gotten loans from a bank, right? Whether personal loans or business loans, these are, pretty generally well understood things, right? If you want to reduce your mortgage payment, you can say, hey, I want to make a big payment to principal and please re-amortize, right? You have to request it, right? And I will say that that request may not happen quickly right now because we've got 3.5 million odd loans that we're trying to start normal loan servicing on, and that's not a small task for an agency that did I think maybe 12,000 economic injury disaster loans, like the biggest it was surge in economic injury disaster loans in SBA history prior to this was hurricanes Maria, it was Hurricane Maria, and that season for hurricanes, and I think we did like 12,000 loans. Okay, this is 3.5 million EIDL loans. So the servicing department certainly has a challenge on their hands, but at some point you'll be able to make those types of loan modifications, is what they're called, right? Make those requests of SBA. And this kind of brings up a segue. I don't know if he's going to ask the question, but folks may recall that there is collateral associated with the loan, right? And it's probably for everybody's education something to touch on. For loans above $25,000, SBA requires collateral, and that collateral is what's referred to, as kind of like a blanket lien on the business personal property, meaning furniture, fixtures, inventory, equipment, things of that nature, not real estate or vehicles. Those are different classes of assets. Okay. And it's a blanket lien, so there's not a list of assets that you submit to SBA. Okay. But there is procedural things you have to keep in mind, and this would be similar to any type of commercial loan where the bank has a lien on your business personal property. Okay, and anytime you want to do transactions with that business personal property outside the normal course of business, you do have to communicate that to SBA. Okay. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned inventory, right? In the ordinary course of business, you're turning over inventory, right? You're buying and selling it all the time, right? That's your normal course of business. You do not have to notify SBA. Okay. But if you have a piece of equipment like a forklift, right, that you want to sell, right, that hasn't been depreciated, it has a value, right, you do need to notify SBA and say, hey, I'm selling this piece of equipment, right, but I don't want to apply those funds to my loan. That's kind of the kind of the way it works. Because I want to buy another forklift, right? Like that's the discussion you're going to have. And then SBA say, well, okay, no problem. Theoretically, when you sell, your business personal property assets outside of the normal course of, of your business, the proceeds are supposed to go to paying down the loan that you have, that those assets are securing, right? So it's just an administrative thing that folks need to be aware of. That if you're going to do something not normal, that you have to keep that in mind. And then other things like, well, if I want to get another loan for something from another bank, well, SBA has a senior position on that lien, right? Well, maybe the bank wants to be senior on that piece of equipment, or even on all of the, business personal property. Hey, SBA, can you please, subordinate this lien so that I can, get a loan from this other entity, just because we have collateral doesn't mean, we're going to treat it any differently than a bank would, because, we still want you to be able to, run your business, right? But there is a lien. So, these are just some of the things to kind of keep in mind. Okay. Um, if you have personal property, right? Like you're a sole proprietor, right? And you have personal assets. Again, it's business personal property. So we're not asking for your house, okay, or your car, right? It's your business personal property. That's what the definition is, and what is reflected when SBA files the lien. Okay.
And when you say that you need to share that information, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Because
So
the EIDL is not through the bank, it's directly through the SBA.
yeah, so it kind of depends on the circumstances. If you're doing this on your own and selling this equipment or whatever, there you notify, when you get your loan statement, it tells you, you've been assigned to this loan servicing center, right? And you contact the loan servicing center and say, hey, I'm selling a piece of equipment, or whatever, right? If you're working with a lender, and your other lender is for whatever the purpose might be, typically your lender will handle that for you, right? You don't necessarily really have to worry about it, because when they are doing their due diligence on the loan, they look up any collateral that you have, right? This is all filed electronically. So one of the first things that lender does is look up UCC filings for that applicant, and they'll see, oh, blanket UC or UCC1 is what it's called, and U.S. Small Business Administration. There you go. They see that information and they know to reach out to SBA to request a subordination or something along those lines. So, so that's probably the biggest thing is if you're working with an existing lender on this, you probably don't have to worry about it too much. You may give them a heads up, be like, hey, by the way, SBA's got a lien on this. You'll see it when you look up the UCC filings. But if you're doing it on your own without the support of a lender, you want to notify SBA so that we can record that on our end. Make sense?
Yep, that's helpful. We do have a couple of questions, and we'll try to keep it within the hour, but if we have lots more questions now, we can keep going a little bit. So there's a request for you to review what you had stated before regarding the safe harbor rules and that form 3508S.
Yeah. So with the simplified forgiveness application, you don't need the safe harbors. That's the way to think about it. Okay. So you only have to meet the requirements for the use of proceeds, spending 60% of the proceeds on payroll expenses and eligible non-payroll expenses. That is essentially now the only requirement, because it's essentially waiving the FTE reduction and the salary and wage reduction, okay, for loans under 50,000. If you have a loan over 50,000, you still are, I guess, accountable for all three, right? The use of proceeds, 60% payroll, the average FTE over the covered period, and I guess you'd call it not reducing wages more than 25% for any one employee, right? So it's on a per employee basis. If it's not the same person, it doesn't matter, right? There is a safe harbor that exists for the FTE reduction. And if you can document that you were shut down, essentially, that does not apply. The wage reduction does apply. There's no safe harbor for the wage reduction. Okay. That is only waived for loans under 50,000. I think that covers it. I know it's a lot. It's like all these different things, but I hope that explains a little bit better. And again, you can, if you want to just, it's pretty clear when you take a look at the applications, what just based on what they're asking, right? So it should be fairly straightforward for the 70% of loans that were under 50,000, though.
So if it's under 50,000, you don't necessarily have to do that paperwork to show that you had an extended closure or anything like that. That's the idea, is that it's streamlined. Anything under 50,000 is streamlined.
Yeah, the only thing, the documents you have to keep are going to be for the use of proceeds, like your payroll, your 941, right? And any of the other eligible expenses you may have.
Okay, very good. Another question, do commission payments count towards the payroll percentage or just hourly wages?
Yep, they count.
Any
bonuses, it's payroll. There is a limit for owner compensation. You're limited to if you're on the 24-week covered period, 2.5 times your average monthly earnings for the business. So that's just based on the eligible loan amount, right? If you're a sole proprietor, and just to keep the math simple, and the maximum you were eligible for was 2.5 times your average monthly earnings, or 10 weeks worth of earnings, right? For the 24-week covered period. For the 8-week covered period, it was 8 weeks. Okay. For businesses where there was an owner plus employees, a payroll, right? Then obviously the loan amount is going to be a lot larger. You're still limited to the 2.5 times your net earnings for paying yourself. Okay. So it's really simple if you're a sole proprietor, because you can pay yourself 100% of the PPP funds on the 24-week covered period. But you are limited if you had a larger loan amount because you had employees. But there is no limit for the employees, except for there is a cap of 100,000 in payroll for any one employee. Okay, not including benefits. So this is where certainly the larger the loan, the more math is required, and the worksheets on the other loans, they help you navigate that. So like, you can plug in the earnings plus the benefits, and kind of calculate what portion, if any, if you had somebody above 100,000, is excluded from the forgiveness calculation. So that would be the other one.
So even just using those worksheets now, the EZ form to kind of calculate what your situation is now, what you can expect, or what you need to be mindful of to make sure you spend what you need to spend. It's a form to be submitted in theory, but it's also kind of a helpful worksheet.
That's a great point. For planning to use the funds correctly, right? If you want to make sure that you're maximizing and doing everything right, and you have a complex situation, larger loan with more variables, more employees, more things you have to keep track of, that might be a good exercise. Probably an even better one is just to reach out to Dale and the team at SBDC to kind of help you plug these things into a plan for how you're going to use the funds, whether it's for the PPP or even for EIDL, right? There are limits to the EIDL. I kind of glossed over them because that could be a whole other webinar in and of itself. But there's a lot of things you can't do with the EIDL funds. You cannot use them to pay down previous debt, right? You can use it to make your normal monthly payments. You can't use it to reduce the balance. You can't pay it down. You can't use the EIDL funds to purchase fixed assets or real estate or improve your business, they're meant to pay the bills. That's really what the EIDL loan funds are meant to pay. However, your business, you may have cash flow that's coming in, right? At the same time, hopefully things are improving. Maybe you do want to make those types of investments. Well, the SBDC can kind of help you document things and put it into a plan, so that you're not breaking any of the rules or anything about how to use the EIDL funds, but so that you can also leverage them essentially, right, to the benefit of your business. So, that's definitely good exercise, but you're absolutely right, bro. Just using the forms is just kind of like, here's what I need to keep in mind as I use the funds. Step one. Step two, go talk with Dale and the team at SBDC to put it in the plan, right?
Right. There's one other specific question, and then we'll wrap it up. What about payments to 1099 vendors? So those contractors, subcontractors, are they included in the PPP, or is it strictly payroll?
Strictly payroll. So compensation for 1099 contractors are specifically excluded. Okay. And the primary reason for that is that they were eligible to apply in and of themselves, right? The PPP program, 1099 contractors were eligible to apply. They're self-employed, right? They are not employees. They are independent contractors. So they really can't be payroll. So, I know that it's common for some businesses to think of their contractors as employees. They're not, legally, they're not. So, if you have a situation where, you're treating your 1099 contractors as employees, then they should be employees. I know it's a discussion for a totally separate webinar.
That's another issue.
Yet another webinar, right? But that's the why, right? You can use the EIDL funds, however, because that would be considered, kind of a working capital expense, right? It's paying your vendors. So you can certainly use the EIDL funds to pay them though.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the wonderful questions. I'm sure the questions that you have asked have helped others as well still on the call. We've still got 20 people here, so lots to learn. We are recording this webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll send it back out with our e-blasts and that sort of thing. If you're not receiving our communication and you got this somehow else, if you want to just shoot us an email at info@slcchamber.org. We can add you to our list. We try to keep our members and the business community updated as much as possible on what's available. And we thank Dan for quickly being available to share this information directly from the source. Hopefully, can you see my screen with the contacts? Okay, perfect. So you'll see there Dan's information, our information here, as well as the Small Business Development Center that Dan mentioned a few times. For those who don't know that team, they're across the region really, but one of the headquarters in Canton and one in Plattsburgh. And they have additional counselors on staff now, thanks to SBA funding. And so don't hesitate. Don't bang your head against the wall. Give them a call, and they can help you. There's no charge for that counseling, and they have 2 specialists additionally right now, one specific to restaurants and one focusing on HR issues. So their phone number and website is there. You can request online counseling or give them a call for virtual counseling as well. And then our friends at the St. Lawrence County IDA are also equipped to help in a lot of ways. There are also some local loan funds available and other resources available too. And I would just say that don't feel like if you're not a small business that you can't call the SBDC, or if you're not a manufacturing entity, you can't call the IDA. We're all really working together to make sure everybody gets the best help they can, and we will refer you to each other so that you get the best help you can. So don't hesitate there. Well, Dan, I want to thank you again. Nice to see you again, and we may be in touch again as we continue to reopen safely and get get the economy going into the holidays and change of season here. Things may change. I was going to mention that you might not want to pay back your EIDL yet. I am always the optimist, but you might want to hang on to that just until we see how the next few months go. But thank you all for joining. Please don't hesitate to be in touch, and you'll be able to find this recording on the St. Lawrence County Chamber YouTube. Today is October 22nd. I just want to mention that too. We've had Dan on a couple times and information changes, but this is as of October 22nd. So thank you again. Have a great day.
Oh.